anyway, a lot of you, I'm sure, know Michael, and a lot of you here to see Michael. And anyway, he's actually celebrating 25 years tonight, or this year, as a recognized pioneer in storytelling technology. And he is also a 4-time Emmy Award winner, who was named as one of Hollywood Reporter's most influential figures in tech. And Michael founded Lightiron, and he also he built the groundbreaking Millennium DXL 8X camera system, and that's when he was at Panavision, and because Panavision bought him, and he became the senior VP of innovation. And then he went to Frame.io. By the way, Patrick Southern here is from Frame.io, so if anybody's using it, has issues, you want to talk to Patrick, raise your hand. And anyway, his third startup, he's just amazing. His third startup is Strada. And Michael continues to push the technological boundaries within media and entertainment, combining expertise as an entrepreneur, innovator, team builder, and mentor. And he is certainly all of those things. So please welcome back to LACPUG, Michael Cioni.
Thanks. Wow, thanks for that. That's great. It's so great to be here. Good to see old friends. Good to make new friends. Really awesome to see Jay, to meet Ben in the lobby. And you're in for a great treat with Sam. I actually got the pleasure of working with Sam on both of our very first features that we were doing. One of the first features I ever color corrected, one of the first features Sam ever edited. This is 100 years ago, but it's cool to see how things come full circle. Now, this is really going to be interesting because what we're going to talk about today is arming ourselves based on all the things that are happening out there. Because I know everybody here is aware that there's some change in the air, right? Everybody's being affected by it. And this is an opportunity because I love to dig deep and figure out how we can capitalize on change. Because for a lot of people, change is bad. But as Michael pointed out when he generously read my history, I'm always leaning into the change. And that's really hard to do. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do. But I want to show you some of the techniques that I've done that helped me be a successful serial entrepreneur and storyteller in this space. And we're going to come back to a theme the entire time. And the story we're going to go through today has a lot of data that you'll be able to use and hopefully activate on. But some of this data is thanks to my brother Peter, who's here as well, who's an incredible researcher. So this presentation includes both Cioni brothers, whether you know it or not. Now, when you start with this, you have to have an analogy to go with. And so I love analogies, and I love stories that can be told like this. And we all have heard this term slipstream, right? The slipstream is this area of low pressure that happens behind a fast-moving object. And what happens when you're back there is there's less wind resistance, right? So you want to be in the slipstream. So when something's moving quickly, if you can get behind it, you're more efficient. This is exactly what capitalizing on new technologies is. It's getting behind these fast-moving trends and being able to move more effortlessly if you can figure out how to get behind them and if you're willing to get really close where it's dangerous. Because the closer you get to a fast-moving object, the more increase the ability for you to move with less effort. But the more dangerous it is if someone hits the brakes, right? And so that's what you've got to figure out. Now, I am like wear no seatbelt, kind of get right up on the bumper type of guy. You may not be that way, but I'm always diving in all the way. And so it's going to start with a little bit of history. And I love telling this history story because if we're going to bet on the future, which is what we're going to talk about, we have to understand the future. And once we can understand the future a little bit, then we can bet on ourselves. I'm always willing to bet on myself. I hope you're willing to always bet on you, right? Because you can trust you more than you can trust anybody else. But you got to understand where you're going to place those bets, and that bet is going to be based on understanding where the future is going to be. And we're going to uncover that with a lot of triangulation this evening. Now, I'm going to start with a bunch of pictures, which are not because I'm interested in sharing embarrassing photos of myself. There is a point to this because I want to show you how to actually do this and how it worked for me. So we have to take a little time travel. We've got to walk back in time, and since we're in LA, we don't walk anywhere. So this is weird to go on a little walk backwards. But here we are at the beginning of really the birth of digital cinema. We didn't even know it was called that yet. I didn't know that it would change my entire life. But this technology, my family was able to raise some money and get me a PD-150. For those of you that know. I know Jay's here. He had a VX-1000, which even was the uncle of the PD-150, right? And that sort of kicked off a lot of this stuff. And then a year later, Final Cut Pro 1.0 comes out. And this is me trying to figure out this space. Michael was always championing this stuff. I hadn't met him yet, but so many wonderful people were behind this. But if you look in this picture, it's a snapshot of this moment of this little skater kid. But you see you see Final Cut, you see the G4, you see DV cam tapes, right? All this stuff and this FireWire connection, which was the first time a simplified data transfer from a captured medium could just be imported into a computer. Remember, digitizing this way was not, it was actually a very clever way of digitizing because it was file migration through videotape, which was very, very advanced at the time. I ended up getting a job at PBS, and so I started working very early, and I started learning the broadcast post-production workflow. That's a Grass Valley 2 Emmy switcher, which I used to be able to play like a Steinway, and so this was a really great way for me to get into it. And then I came to LA. Dropped out of school, moved to LA, and started building my first business with the director Christopher Coppola. And we called it Plaster City Digital Post. And there, this is my partner Ian Verdevec, and he and I went to school. And we started building post-production workflow, but we really didn't know what we were doing. We were just assembling all this new tech that was coming together. All this stuff was emerging so quickly, we got really excited about it, and we started growing this little business. And that's actually how we met Sam Restivo, because he was a type of filmmaker that was looking to they were trying to raise the bar, aim really high, but they wanted to save money, but they didn't want anyone to know. Right? A lot of people are going to be wanting to save money. I'm in for that too. But do you know how to save it and not show that you're saving it, right? And that's the trick. That's where technology can sneak in and actually mask the ability to actually make something look and sound and perform better than the dollars you spent on it. And so that was something Sam did with a technology that we sort of pioneered, and his film was able to shoot on film but not have to do a film sort of typical processing at the time. And that's what we were able to do at Plaster City. This idea sort of grew, and all these people started getting interested in it, and we started having to build a business and grow. These are Xsan raids, and we started building all this stuff. Here we have on the left, this was about the size, it was about 7 feet tall, and it was 24 terabytes. And 24 terabytes, 7 feet tall, it was about $120,000 for 24 terabytes back then. But we were one of the first facilities that actually exercised this idea of a centralized network, right? And then we eventually built a new company called Light Iron. And at Light Iron, we took this even further. And we started pushing 4K. And I became friends with the founder of the Red Company, Jim Gennard. And we started pushing this 4K initiative. When people are saying sands aren't going to be the future, videotape's still going to be around, film's going to be around, we said, no. If that's true, you can have it. But we're going to try something different. And then Red comes around and pushes this stuff. So then all these filmmakers that started getting excited about digital cinema, they started coming over, and we started pushing all this technology, and we were doing films for directors like Zemeckis and Fincher and Rob Marshall and things like that. And so we're doing these projects, and here is this little group of digital nerds that just got really good at studying for this test, and I'm telling you the truth, we were working on films we had no business working on. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no infrastructure. We were figuring it out as we went. And it's sort of a phrase I use now, is like, just don't look down. Just don't look down. As soon as you look down, you realize you're vulnerable. But if you just keep going and just keep swimming, you know, things can happen. And then the iPad comes out, and we built the very first iPad Daily Zap, and it was pushing iPad technologies and these mobile technologies. And we said we could take mobility even further, because hard drives started to get faster and smaller, and RAID started to get more powerful, that we started mobilizing post-production altogether, and we started building mobile post systems so that people could shoot wherever they wanted in the world, and they didn't have to ship the media back to Los Angeles to be processed. They could process everything right there on the set. Today you know this is DIT, but 15 years ago this was very nuanced and different and new, because everybody else just said you have to ship it to the lab to do anything with it. And we said, what if you don't, right? And so we pioneered all that stuff. Over this period we started working on all these projects, television shows and feature films all over the place, and really enjoying it. And then we bet on the next thing. Right around 2014, which I can't believe is 10 plus years ago, this idea of high dynamic range came about, and we were the very first people to do HDR finishing. In fact, the very first show to have HDR, which you call Dolby Vision today, but it hadn't been invented in 2014. But when we were doing this, the very first show was transparent. And Amazon was the very first network to actually have a 4K HDR transmission through the internet. And at that time, it was duct tape and glue, but we knew that this would tip. And people said, why? No one's going to have 4K at home. Look around. You can't even buy an HD TV if you wanted to, right? Nobody's going to see HDR. Dolby Vision's not going to materialize and democratize. Of course it did. Now, this is a Dolby Vision device, right? And so it's like all this stuff is about being on the early side. Panavision saw this and they said, this is kind of interesting technology, let's partner with them. And what we did with Panavision, which is the world's largest camera rental company, and they're very well known for their optics, we took Panavision optics, and with our relationship and partnership with Red, we took Red's sensors and their compute technology, and then with Light Iron, we took our workflow knowledge and color science, and we built a camera. This was an exclusive camera just for Panavision customers. You couldn't buy it, you could only rent it, you could still rent it today, but this at the time, now 10 years ago, was an 8K large format camera. And when we said, we're gonna see a future of 8K large format, back then people threw tomatoes at us. Like, why would anyone do this? There'll never be hard drives fast enough. You'll never be able to get the difference. You'll never be able to see this. You'll never be able to process this or download it or store it or save it or render it. And all that, of course, was untrue. You can do all those things, but at the beginning they seem a little nuts. And this was a really great opportunity to kind of push 8K in large format, which is now available in Blackmagic, right? You know, that's what's really cool. Where a decade ago they didn't even make a camera. And then I got this itch and I started seeing all this change into the cloud. And I said, well, you know, the cloud is the next frontier. And I wanted to start seeing cameras actually shoot to the cloud instead of to hard drives. And I wanted to kick off this initiative. And so I joined the CEO, Emmy Wells, in a startup called Frame.io. And we started kicking off camera to cloud technology. And while it is very new, about 8 years from now, 7 to 8 years from now, you won't have magazines and cameras that you pull out. Your cinema cameras will record to internal caches, and they will wirelessly transmit those caches and move those files. Most of them, just like your phone, if the easiest way to get files off your phone, you don't plug it in and download it, right? You use Wi-Fi, use the internet to move assets off your phone. Cinema will go the same way over the next, by the mid-2030s. And so we're in the early stages of moving camera to cloud. We kicked that off. And today, if you own a Red Raptor or a Red Komodo, you can actually connect your Red Raptor or Komodo to a Wi-Fi signal, and you can actually shoot to the cloud if you have the bandwidth, which you probably don't. But we know this story because bandwidth will come. Workflow will change. These things will materialize. We were talking in the Gurus, you were talking about H.264. HEVC is actually, and VP9 and AV1 are going to be codecs that are going to really, really, really help you out, and they're going to be very powerful. I'm not a firm believer. In fact, I'm kind of against codecs like Blackmagic Raw and stuff like that. I think they're leading us down a path that is the wrong direction for democratization and control and collaboration in the future, and I don't think the benefits of quality are worth it. And so we're going to see some shifts in the codec market, and I think the user-generated content could really initiate those shifts. So over doing this, eventually the camera to cloud story comes out, and Adobe buys Frame.io, and then at the end of the day, we have this little story. So this is a brief picture of my history, how I got here, and what I'm going to do next. Now, if we look at this picture, when I was back at Southern Illinois University, I bet on digital over analog. When I was at Plaster City, I bet on files over tape. At Light Iron, I bet on 4K over 2K. At Panavision, we bet on 8K large format over 35, and then at Frame.io and Adobe, we bet on the cloud acquisition space. These were all the major bets that I put out there. All of these turned out to be good bets. They were all good bets. And part of that is luck, some of that is hard work, some of that is grit, and some of that is really good teams. And I love assembling great talent together. So where I'm headed is in a new direction called Strada, which I'm not here to talk about tonight. I'm here to talk about something that helps you, but I want to paint that picture so you can understand the philosophy. Now, I didn't just throw darts on the wall. These were decisions that were based on data. And the more we can understand the future, we can bet on it, and then you get to bet on yourself. So where do we start with betting on the future? Well, we need to start looking at the size of the market. Now, I know everybody is well aware, I'm certainly well aware, of what's changing in the market out there, but there's a lot of good news in the market. And I don't want to give false hopes. This is all realistic stuff. So some of this is going to land and be helpful and hopeful, and some of it's going to be frustrating and difficult. And so we have to understand and be honest with that. But here's the good news. What's going to happen in the market by 2030? Well, if we look at where we were in 2023, production in North America was $50 billion. $50 billion. So we can expect it's going to go up, and that's a good news. It's going to go up. But here's the beauty. By 2030, this is going to go so big, it's going to be 5 times as big. By 2030, production in North America will be spending $150 billion a year. This is really good news because there is a major increase in the investments in that. What is going to be different that nobody wants to face is where is that spent? Because you have a special preconceived notion of where you'd like that 150 to be spent, and you'd prefer it in the area that you are working in right now, or we're working in 2021 and 2 and 23, right? And so this is what's going to change, is where that spend is. But the spend is going to be there. Now, what's interesting is I started to be like, okay, well, I noticed some trends and some great data coming from the outside. Here's something I noticed that's really interesting. There are always new companies being formed, but there's a few companies that get formed and they come out of nowhere. Companies like Aperture, DJI, Blue Condor, Rode, and Dizio, these are all companies that 10 years ago almost nobody ever heard of. Many of them didn't exist more than 5 or 6 years ago. And here they are now juggernauts. How did that happen? What does that mean? Because normally a company that comes out of nowhere, a startup, an entrepreneur moving something, is something that takes a really long time to get to a tipping point that it's a standard. These people have moved in really quickly. And they've lowered costs and maintained that high quality, right? Think about in the mobile space, CapCut, Splice, B-Script, Moment, and Small Rig. These are all companies that serve the mobile space with rigs and lenses and software and editing tools, all that stuff. 10 years ago, didn't exist. 5 years ago, barely existed. Now, you use a lot of these tools, right? And these are now becoming normal tools, and they're very, very powerful tools, and they're coming out of these areas. And what's really important about that is to see that something's changing in the market, and it's upsetting the incumbent systems. They're threatened. The companies that I used to worship, like Mo Richardson, they don't understand how did a company like Aperture come in and like actually pass them. Mo Richardson was just known for the best quality lights, and it was like the top end of Hollywood. And now it's like, yeah, I can get so much done with a light from Aperture that's literally a tenth the price, right? Or Rode microphones. When I grew up, I had to learn you got to shoot on a Sennheiser or you're going to regret it. Anybody else, right? But here we are. It's like, oh, I can use a Rode mic. It's about a tenth the price, sounds amazing, and the workflow's even better, right? And like that's what's changing. And so what this means for us is there's also groundbreaking changes in Apple's ecosystem. And since Apple is the preferred operating system for most creative people, what's really cool is Apple's doing something different than everybody else. While you see all these conversations about what's happening with NVIDIA, Apple, conversely, is saying, we're actually going to put more speed at the edge. Right? You can put all this processing in the cloud, and Apple, you don't hear them talking about cloud processing. They're the only company out there saying we're talking about edge processing, right? Local processing. Either they know something that we don't know, or they're placing a big bet that the cloud isn't going to materialize the way that some people hope, and the power is actually local. Right? And that's really interesting. They got M4 chips. We're going to see an M5, and then they're moving to another set of series of chips. They've got now H.265 encoders in real time. When I was, during the pandemic, I was doing 4K transcoding from ProRes to H.265 in 10-bit, and on a Intel Mac back then, you got 2 frames per second. That's what you got. And I did it so much during that pandemic, I know exactly what it was. Also, I had to lift my computer up and put like ice packs under it because the fans would go on. And now HEVC can run at over 200 frames per second. If you're doing 1080, you can do 300 to 400 on an M4 in H.265 10-bit encoding. That is insane speed, right? And then we've also got things like Apple Log. Now Apple's getting into the acquisition game with their phones and Apple Log with high dynamic range. I have a YouTube series, and I actually have an episode dedicated to measuring the dynamic range of an iPhone, which, by the way, is more than the original Red 1 camera. So this shoots more stops than 35mm film, Kodak 5219, believe it or not. And then we've got some ML processing now in the Apple ecosystem, because Apple doesn't say AI, they say ML, but we know what they mean. So these are things that are changing that are really good. And what that sets us up for is, where is that $150 billion going to get spent? Well, it's not all going to be in the high-end typical production space that we used to. Now we're seeing this massive growth in the creator economy. The creator economy is a really interesting thing, because you know it's there, you've always heard about it, some of you are invested in it, all of you consume it on some level. But how do you get into it? And what's really powerful about the creator economy is, in 2023, there were 50 million creators that were contributing to the creator economy. 50 million people on the globe are publishing all these things that we watch on our phones and devices. But by 2028, it's going to double to 100 million. 100 million people are going to be shooting and editing and delivering something. 100 million. 20 years ago, there was probably only a few 100,000 people that were capable of shooting and editing and delivering something. And now it's going to go to 100 million. But here's the best part about it. 4% of that 100 million, 4 million people, are what we call creative professionals. And creative professionals will be earning more than 6 to 7 figures a year for the stuff that they create. Now think about that. 4 million people will be earning more than 6 figures on their channels through the content they create. Some of them will do it as supplemental income. Some of them will make it primary income. But if you think about this town, we are not that big. Like, think how big this town is in the production and post-production space. We're talking, a few tens of thousands of people in that space, and most of them don't make 6 to 7 figures a year. And now what we're seeing in the creator economy is 4 million people are going to be extremely well compensated for the work that they're doing as creative professionals. That's an incredible number by 2028. And then we can think about this. The growth of broadcast is just, it's in really bad shape. Now, 2024 was a great year for broadcast because it was an Olympic year, and the Olympics did really well. But look at this stat. YouTube cracked something last year that nobody expected. They cracked double digits. And if you look at this really closely, YouTube represents half of all the viewing that broadcast gets. And broadcast is all the broadcast combined is 20% of viewing and declining. And YouTube is now half of that by itself. And you know how much YouTube, you know how much Google spends on any of the content they produce for YouTube? Zero, right? They don't produce any of it. You produce it, but they earn the revenue and the eyeballs on it. They split that. It's a very fair share. It's a 50-50 split with the creators. And they're now getting 10% of the views. That's amazing. And that means sometime over the next 5 years, we're going to see broadcast and YouTube pass each other, right? And broadcast is going to go, less people will be watching broadcast. Ask yourself, for the last 5 years, 5 years ago, do you watch less YouTube than you do today? You just know it. The answer is yeah, I watch more YouTube today than I did 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, watching YouTube on your TV as an app was a little out there, a little rare, and today it's very common. And broadcast doesn't have an answer for that. And what we saw happen with streaming with the football game on Netflix is going to really disrupt things, because the NFL does not care what network they broadcast on. They want to bring it to the fans. And the fans, if they want to watch it on the moon, the NFL will say, let's go to the moon, right? And so when they say it's going to be on Netflix, it's going to happen, right? When it's going to go streaming, it's going to happen. And broadcast is going to be left trying to figure out what happened, right? And you don't want to be in that position, right? There's this new world order changing. All of these are new forms of exhibition that are open to all of us. We didn't have all these forms of exhibition. If we go back 75 years, in 1950, there were only a few networks. That was all the exhibition there was. Then in 1975, cable gets invented, and now we see more acquisition being created so that you can distribute it in cable. But then the internet comes out and we see the hockey stick effect, right? And now there's so many exhibition options that it's totally out of control. So what does it mean? Well, it means that we have an insatiable appetite for content consumption. We love watching stuff, right? We absolutely love it, and we'll go anywhere to get it. In fact, if we think about it, One of the things that's really smart about Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, is he actually knows how to look at this stuff, and he thinks about this differently. Netflix is the most successful streamer in the world, and they're the most successful now content creation, high-end content creation machine in the world. And part of it is based on their ideology, because Reed understands how people think and how to position the business to work with the way people think. Because Reed knows that the biggest competitor, who do you think Netflix considers their biggest competitor? YouTube? No. What's that? Amazon? No. 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 Not even Apple, not Twitch. No. I'll tell you. It's different. Sleep, close. Very close. Netflix looks their biggest competitor is your free time. And now think about orienting your business around that ideology. It changes how you build the product. It changes how you make the content. It changes how you advertise it and how you communicate to it, right? Because you understand that we're competing with free time. Netflix considers you being an elevator, that's a competitor, because you're going to be on Instagram or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube in the elevator, right? Or, this is a place that is a big competitor, right? This is a place that's a big competitor, right? Netflix doesn't want you here. They want you to watch their stuff. They're worried about your free time. And that's an opportunity to reorientate the business. What that helps me think about is this engine that's starting to happen. And there's so many people that have figured it out. And what makes me sad is that if Hollywood doesn't figure this out at large very soon, it's going to be sitting idly by wondering what happened? Where did this all go? Because what got us here won't get us there. And we have to be honest with that. Now, if we have more outlets, which we showed and talked about all these new outlets for distribution, then it means that more creators can come about because there's more outlets. I was speaking at NAB a bunch of years ago, and I used the example that there are people who believe in flat Earth, right? And the point was not to argue, for me, the point is not to argue that flat earthers exist or that they're silly or dumb or ignorant. The point is, there's a market for flat earthers. And if there's a market for flat earthers, there's a market for everything, because they need to consume flat earth content, right? And so there should be consumption for everything. So there's more creators because there's more outlets. If there's more creators, then more tools have to get invented. Remember the tools at the beginning? All those new tools that didn't exist before, they now have a place to get into because there's more people, so there's more tools. There's more tools to get there. And if there's more tools, then more content gets made. Because if the tools are more accessible, they're more affordable, they're more available, and you have a way to do it, round and round this goes. More creators are created, right? And there's no excuse. We know that no matter what happens in the macroeconomic climate, we know that shooting is cheaper, editing is cheaper, access is cheaper, lighting is cheaper, music is cheaper, mixing is cheaper, coloring is cheaper. We have no excuse to say that this stuff is inaccessible. It's too far away. It's too hard. It's too, right? When I grew up, where I used to spend my money was Guitar Center. Anytime I go to Guitar Center, creative people, we love buying gear, right? And whether it's music or computers or whatever. And I just love the feeling of being able to upgrade my kit, right? A little bit better microphone, a little bit better amplifier, right? A little bit better processor. This is the same thing in the art that we create. And that is so accessible. And just you keep leveling that stuff up, and you have a real opportunity to make amazing, amazing things. And you don't have to be fighting for like the highest, most expensive stuff now. There's no excuse. We have it all, and we have the outputs too. Back in the day when we were talking about Hollywood, Hollywood defined workflows for narrative productions. People look to this zip code to figure out what is the way we're supposed to work. And if you go all around the world, everyone that does production does it our way. It was invented here. It was perfected here. We figured it out. You can travel anywhere and they follow suit. This is where it was born and where it came from. In broadcast, it was news and sports. When you wanted to figure out how to do broadcast, you looked at news and sports to figure out how that goes. But today, which is so exciting, we get to decide the workflows. I don't look to Hollywood anymore. Hollywood is more of a rule for what not to do than it is for what to do, because they are still trying to figure out how to get rid of or monetize things that they invested in that they probably don't need or can't monetize easily. This is all very good news if you're not following. If you're not getting this, this is good news, because as the ease of content creation goes up, the amount of content creation will go up, right? And that's an opportunity. And we know that there's production spend that's allocated, that's growing, and that there's user-generated content that has continued to explode, and there's money to be spent, and there are so many eyeballs to consume it. And most of the platforms out there will do rev shares with the content owners, and people that have figured this out are raking it in, and in a few years, 4 million of them will be truly raking it in. Even Mr. Wonderful agrees with me.
There are 3 disciplines you should focus on. Number 1, engineering. Number 2, engineering. And number 3, engineering. And if you get any chance at night, get some engineering classes while you're getting your engineering degree. Because everything else is bullshit. It's just a hobby. I don't feel that way at all anymore. At all. Because I look at people that I used to hire for $25,000 a year, photographers, videographers, writers, artists. They're costing me $250,000 a year, and I can't even hire them as staff anymore. They only take contract work because they're doing 2 deals with 3 companies at the same time, pulling in $700,000 a year. They're only 28 years old. It's a renaissance for artists. So how do you harness this? How do you monetize this or reduce the cost? I never saw this coming.
So it's really, really changing, and the people that he's talking about that are doing that probably didn't go to the same school of thought that we went to, some of us. And that's why we have to get in gear and start to realize how we can be compensated and grow the way that he's talking about it. So to focus on that, like many of you are already in the slipstream, but some of you are not. Some of you are not in that slipstream and you're not getting the benefits. Well, one, if you're not in the slipstream, then you're working in a sector that isn't benefiting from the tailwind. That's the number one reason. If you're not in the slipstream, it's because you're in the wrong sector. If you are, if your suite of services is too narrow, then you're not able to capitalize on the tailwinds because you're focused on one discipline, one thing. And the third issue is that you don't feel you're being compensated for your services. This is a poor plan. This came out last year. There was this ideology that was going around. I didn't agree with it. It was called Survive Till 25. And the reason I didn't like it, it's a very passive approach that like the flipping of a calendar somehow is going to like change everything. And in 25, everything will be better. By the way, the data doesn't support that was ever going to happen. And so the Survive to 25 doesn't really make any sense because it's like waiting for a bus that's never going to come. And so what's your plan? We need a plan. And now here's something really interesting. Peak TV is basically where we could try to figure out when was TV at its highest point. Now what happened is between 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, and up into 20, TV kept rising. And all the productions started going. There were over 500 to 600 series greenlit in 2020. But then it starts to go down. And it goes down. There was a little bit of rebound in 21 post-pandemic, but it keeps going down. This was in Variety yesterday. This is a brand new article that came out that you can kind of see when the strikes happen, you can see that the blue line is reality content because it wasn't affected by the strike. So there's a compensation effect during the strikes with reality, but as soon as that ended, it starts to all decay. Now this decay, we don't know where the bottom of this is, by the way. Nobody knows how low this goes. But the data trend showing right here is still downwards. And we don't know, is this the bottom? It could be, we don't really know yet. We have to go through 2025 and see. But it is not necessarily going to go up at all. It may just flatline, or it may keep going to decay, which I actually think is more likely given all the other things that are happening outside of this. It doesn't mean filmmaking goes away and storytelling isn't valuable and people don't want to consume it. That's not what I'm saying. It's all about volume and where it's going. When people's tastes change, our content must too. One of the things that bothers me about filmmakers a lot of times is there's very pretentious filmmakers that are saying, what they're doing is they're projecting their love of a certain type of film and storytelling onto everybody else. And they say, film will never go away, and they're really saying, because I love it so much. Well, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's not a reason, because people's tastes change, right? Why do we love Radiohead? Because they changed with the tastes of everybody. And then you got all these other guys that have to go to Yamava and play a concert for like a bunch of people that sit in a chair because they never changed, right? And that's a fine concert to go to. But the products and the people and the artists that change with people's tastes tend to live longer and do better and be able to widen their addressable market. And that's what we have to be able to do. So if we look at all this together, we see all these things. How are we going to synthesize this? This is my bet on the future. It's UGC. It's all of this empowering yourself. It's a new set of tools that you don't necessarily have today, a new type of workflow, and we need to be able to bet on ourselves. So how do we bet on ourselves to kind of round the bases here? And I think it starts with being honest with ourselves. See, if you're being honest with yourself, then you understand that if you're not working in a sector that's benefiting from the tailwinds, you've got to change sectors. If you've been sitting and you believed in the survive till 25 hashtag, I think you need to explore a different sector. Now, if your suite of services is too narrow to capitalize on the tailwinds, then you've got to learn how to provide more services. Some of you are going to be fine just doing a single discipline and being exceptional at it. You're going to hear from Sam in a few minutes. This is an exceptional editor, and he's been doing it for a very long time, and he continues to hone that in. But if you want to continue to widen and you're in a space that you want, if you're not getting the tailwinds, then you've got to widen your services. And then if you don't feel that you're being compensated, it's really easy. Change sectors and provide more services, and then you'll get compensated for that stuff. Now, how do we actually do this? I'll show you kind of how to do this. See, this is how I provide more services. There are two types of major tools out there, and I call them point solutions and compound solutions. This is actually why I don't like Premiere Pro and Avid. They're fine for editing. I'm not talking about them as editing. Every time people want to argue about NLEs, they talk about the editing features. I don't care. Editing is mostly in here and in here. It's not really, it's just one shot in front of the other, and Sam can put them in an order better than the rest of us. That's just kind of what editing is. But what I don't like about Premiere and Avid is that they are point solutions. They are designed to be editing systems. That's all they really do. You ever tried to color correct in Premiere or Avid, it's a horror show, right? And so we know that. Or sound mixing. It's a nightmare. But what I like about Final Cut and Resolve is they're compound solutions. They allow you to expand your discipline because they are much better at color and sound and compositing and effects and titles, and they do more of those things, and they're much more well-rounded. The more you dive into compound solutions, the more well-rounded you actually become inadvertently without even realizing it. It's like working out every muscle of your body instead of just getting Popeye arms. And that's what Premiere and Adobe make. They make Popeye arm people. And these compound solutions make you a full-on fit bodybuilder. Now, you can also take that and expand further, where you add other tools. Like the best people that are good at compounding learn something like Final Cut, then they learn and understand motion, and then logic, and things like that. And so they're able to compound all these together. And then whenever a project comes in, they're able to do more faster at a higher quality. And then your reputation goes up real fast because you'll get referred. But when you refer to people that are really good at point solutions, they might be good at editing, but then you realize you're stuck with, what about the premix and the sound? Well, I don't do that. Okay, what about, can you do a rough color? I don't really do that. Well, how do we do a turnover to the finishing? I don't really do that, right? And that's where the point solutions can hurt you when we're talking about this expanded opportunity and UGC. I used to always hear this term, we come to LA because it's all about who you know, right? That's what we all say, but it's not that anymore. The opportunity to capitalize on everything that's changing is all about who knows you. And we've got to become better at this. We're really bad at this. It's funny that storytellers are really good at telling other people's stories, but they're not really good at talking about themselves. In fact, it feels dirty and kind of ugly, and we kind of get all shy and stuff like that. What we have to realize is that Instagram is the best business card we've ever had. Because you can show what you're doing all the time, and people are literally attracted to people who are busy and they're creating. And then you go, this person's always working. And it doesn't have to be that impressive. It's just a picture. I'm working today. I'm working today. I'm working today. What a lot of us do is we work really hard in stealth, and then when we're done, I did a project, hire me, right? That's usually the pattern. And that's when you need to let Instagram do its work for you while you're working. Then you won't have an off season. But a lot of us have to do an off season to actually get the next gig. And this is a really good way. And just look at the influencing community. Just look at the UGC community. They know how to do this. They're always creating. It's habitual. It's coffee and create and post. It's all how they get everything done by 9 a.m. And we need to learn how to do that. And we also need to think about where I think the biggest opportunity is, and we all talk about AI. but a lot of people are invested in the Gen AI space. The Gen AI will be a thing, and it's going to dominate advertising and take over a lot of the advertising market and stuff like that. But for the actual storytellers, I wouldn't worry about Gen AI. There's a lot of noise out there, but I'm not concerned about Gen AI for the creative storyteller. It is about utilitarian AI. Utility AI is AI. See, Gen AI is for disposable content. So I don't even care if people make disposable content, but we want to make in real life content. If you do in real life content, the opportunity is with utility AI. This is a really interesting survey from Creator Now. They analyzed and asked people that are using AI, how are you actually using it? And what's really fascinating is that cost reduction was the lowest percentage. People aren't using AI to save money, which is what a lot of the people that make AI think it's for. But really, the one that's really powerful is speed, right? Like it's all about going faster when you figure out how to use it, and then what we call the skills gap, filling a skills gap. So this unlocks this idea, which I call the skills gap principle. And this is really killer stuff. So here's how the skills gap principle works. And if you can understand how this works and figure out how to apply it, you can accelerate so much of your work. It's amazing. So when you make something, when you do something, there are things that are close to you. So if you're an editor, then editing is very close to you. But if you're an editor, then maybe sound mixing is not close to you, or maybe composing is not close to you. So there's things that are close and far. But then there are also things that you value really high and things you don't value at all. And this creates this little quadrant. So when things are close to you and you put a high value on them, that's your job. You should do that. You should be paid for that. That's your vocation. That's what you're trained. That's what's passionate. And that's what makes you get up in the morning and do it. But if something is far away from you, but it's really important, that's when you hire an expert, right? I'm not really good at composing, so I'm going to get a composer to do that for me. Or I'm not good at color correction, I'm going to get a colorist to do that for me, because it's a high value. Now, if something's far away from you and it's a low value, maybe you don't have to do it at all. Just ignore it, because it doesn't really matter, and it might not affect the production or the project or the output or the views or the likes or anything like that. And then this is the big one. If something's really important to you or really close to you, but it's a low value, that's where AI can work. You automate it. That's the part. And there are so many tools that you've got to learn. This is the spot that you find the AI tools, and when you run across them, you find where can they go in the automation space. And the automation space is where it's low value, but something that's close to you, because you know it, right? You understand it, but maybe you're not going to get compensated by it. You could take the same chart here and call it the budget gap principle, right? If it's close to you and you're good at it, you do it, right? If you're not paid to do it, you outsource it. If you're not paid and it's a low task, ignore it or automate it, right? For example, there's a tool called Avoto. Avoto does this amazing, it's replacing Photoshop for all retouching. It's something that's, you can automatically retouch people. And so when you need to retouch, but you don't get paid for it, you just use Avoto. Or eMastered. eMastered is an AI product where you can give it a rough mix, and it will, about 2 or 3 minutes later, you'll get a mixed output. And you can control it, and you can set some sliders. If you don't know anything about mixing, give it a rough mix, and you get a final mix back. And could you get a better mix from a real mixer? Of course. But remember, in this category, if you're not paid to do it, then just automate it. Or if it's something you know a lot about, but it's a low value, just automate it. And those are a couple examples of tools that I love using. Look, the best creatives are going to create. We know this. Like, creatives are always going to create. And when you do this, you get to share your knowledge. I love sharing knowledge because I think knowledge breeds curiosity. And now this is really important for how some of you can actually monetize this, because many of you have a specific gift. You have a way of speaking, a knowledge, an experience, or something like that. And so if you have that knowledge and you start putting it out there in a UGC form, people get curious. And then if you're passionate about that, people start to trust you, because the people that you follow and you watch those videos and you comment and stuff, they're getting paid by that. And part of the reason is you trust them, because you like them and you go back because they're passionate. And then if you have a willingness to teach, because a lot of stuff that we watch on the internet is educational in some form, right? If you do that, then people will follow you. And that could be people that teach workflows. A really good example is a cinematographer, a great friend of mine, Shane Hurlbut. Shane Hurlbut is known for shooting some of the most amazing movies, very avant-garde films like Act of Valor and Terminator Salvation and things like that. Amazing cinematographer. But in his spare time, which I can't believe I'm saying he even has it, he is teaching incredible gaffing and production cinematography stuff through his cinematography training course, Filmmakers Academy. It's amazing. It is the most incredible teaching course. There's no school in the country that can compete with Shane Hurlbutt's Internet Academy. It's amazing. It's that good. And so he is knowledgeable. People are curious. He's passionate beyond words. And so people trust him. And he's got a willingness to teach, and people follow him. And this little idea that was passive income becomes a career. And it's helping people, and it's encouraging people, and people can tell their stories largely because of people like Shane doing that stuff. This is where I think so many people here, whether it becomes primary or passive, people here should be creating more and realizing there are audiences. There's 8 billion people. Those numbers aren't going to lie. The amount of people that can consume and watch and see and experience this stuff only keeps going up. So the opportunity is there, and the cost of shooting and editing and acquiring and collaborating keeps going down. And if we just keep betting on the same tools and tech and techniques that we did before, then it's not survive till 25, it's just survive. And nobody wants to do that. We want to thrive. And if people that thrive constantly are rowing. If you're standing at the edge of the Colorado River in Class 5 rapids in the spring, it's millions of gallons of water. It's deafening, if you've ever seen it, of this water going down. And you're just like, how can I can't get in here, I would completely get killed. And then all of a sudden, these boats are coming down, and the people are just paddling as hard as they can. Once you get in this river, not only can you survive, it's fun. And this is like what you got to do is get in it and paddle. But when you're on the sidelines, you just see like, I can't do this. I can't get in it. And what many of us have to do is learn how to just get in Class 5 rapids and start paddling. And we've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And this is the way to do it. I'm placing my bets on a new technology that I've started building, which is called Strada. And for me, it's all about collaborating. And the contrarian nature that me and my brother tend to have, we're starting to bet against the cloud. We feel the cloud is actually not making good on the promises that it kept. And I think the cloud is too expensive. The way people are charging for it is unsustainable. And I think we have to subscribe to too many tools in order to make a work actually flow. And when you have 15 cloud subscriptions, you got media in 4 different places, and you got people coming in and out, and you're trying to share email passwords because you can't afford more users, and the bills come in with all the storage. This is not going to work. We did this, we made a lot of movies and did a lot without the cloud. And the cloud came in, and it promised some really cool things, and it delivers some cool things, but it's also falling way short. And I want to challenge all that. And so what I'm doing is taking all of the data that I talked about, and I'm applying it to building a new way of collaboration and workflow that is not fully leveraging the cloud. It's actually working kind of a little bit more old school. We're using good old computers on your lap to actually do the work for us, instead of having to upload everything to get something done. It's like, I need one little thing, I have to upload it. I need one little thing, I need to upload it. I need to download it and download it. Now I have 3 copies. That's just not how collaboration should be done. And when people are worried about security, why do we have a solution that makes you make 4 copies of every file because you got to have it in 4 different places? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So this is what we're trying to build. And so I'm betting on the future of the user-generated content world, and a world of a lot of a wider audience and people that consume things that are a little different than the traditional things that we create here. And I'm betting on that world, and I'm betting on myself to try to build that and acquire, assemble a team together to do that. So this is where I just like to practice what I preach, and I love being able to always talk to LACPUG, because it's amazing to always see creative people, some that I've known for many, many years. But I really, really hope that all of you think about some of this stuff and how you can actually take advantage of it, because we all have an opportunity to really, really succeed in this industry. So thank you so much. I really appreciate the time to chat with everybody. Thank you. Thanks. Yeah. Questions? Yeah, so we could take a few questions if there's some questions based on anything we talked about. Yes?
I want to know something about how you're building. Like, are you building with reshaping technologies, like do you have APIs for what you're doing? Are you in JavaScript HTML land, or are you doing some?
Repeat the questions.
Yeah. The question was, well, what is it that I'm building? How is it actually being built? What makes it different? So what we're really doing different at Strada is, if you think about it, most of the companies that are building technology are using NVIDIA, right? You hear NVIDIA a lot. And they're saying, let's build all this in cloud infrastructure so we can infinitely scale it. It sounds good. It makes sense. But if you look really closely, Apple has been talking about a completely different approach. Apple is the only company saying, we're going to start building processors again. Why would they start building processors if all the processing is being promised in the cloud to be at infinite scale? Why would Apple build the M series chips? Now they're on M4, there'll be an M5, and then they move to the new series. So they're betting on edge compute. And that's an interesting, if you pay attention, you're like, wow, that's really different. Why do I care about how much processing can happen here if I'm supposed to have this infinite cloud machine? Does Apple know something? Right? So what we're doing is we're building a product. It leverages the cloud to make it aggregate and scale and reach all these people. But our processing can be done here. So that if you process here, then it costs zero. Right? Because you don't get charged for processing at the edge. You get charged for processing on AWS or Azure or GCP. So our tech stack, which is written in Rust and React, allows us to be able to build cloud infrastructure, but do all the work locally because people have the fastest computers. In fact, there is not a computer in AWS faster than this right here. This is an M3. There is not a single computer in AWS that's faster than M3. In fact, the fastest computers in AWS are a couple years behind. Now, you can have more computers work together in S3, but then you have to pay for that. And so AWS is going to get a nickel for every single frame that you do something to it. But if you do it here, you all know when you render something locally, it costs you nothing to render locally. But if you have to do it in the cloud, whether you realize it or not, when you're paying for a cloud service, some of that is the compute cost. So if we eliminate the compute cost and we favor the edge, we flip everything upside down. And then the other thing is everybody stores everything in the cloud to be able to collaborate. Well, why can't you store it on a hard drive and collaborate? So we are building a technology that allows you to put the file, leave your files on your hard drive, but connect your hard drive into Strada and share your media from your hard drive, i.e. you are a cloud. Because what's a cloud? It's a hard drive on the internet. Strada simply is an air traffic controller that allows you to access media anywhere, but it is never uploaded in the first place. So there's no upload fee, so there's no storage fee. If there's no storage fee, there's no egress. And then we can take the price of the product and make it like way, 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 way less. So that's essentially the tech stack difference.
That makes your logo make sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Good eye. Yeah.
What's the best way to stay up to date on trends?
Ooh, great question. What's the best way to stay up to date on trends? So I'll tell you what, you might not like this answer. There certainly are ways to read a lot, and I would actually say two answers. The part you'll like, LinkedIn, which is the least good social platform, right? We all agree, right? LinkedIn's the worst, right? Okay. So LinkedIn, if you start following the right people, the amount of information that's on LinkedIn, which essentially inadvertently kind of filters out like nonsense, the noise. There's really good data on LinkedIn that's all about these trends. Almost every day on our team, we see articles in LinkedIn that validate, verify, or contradict some of the thoughts that we have. But you got to read LinkedIn every single day. My brother's in the back. If you're at the break, you should find him. He will tell you some groups to follow, or you can just email me and I'll send you some. But the other thing that I would say so that's very, very left-brained, right? Read LinkedIn. That's very left-brained. What I would also say is very right-brained, which is I actually follow my favorite things to follow are there's a couple of feeds. They're different, but one that I follow is called the Startup Archive. And if you follow the Startup Archive, you'll get fed other ones. But these are some of the best entrepreneurs in the world telling their stories through lots and lots of panels that they've been on over the years. And these are cut down to little like 1-minute chunks. And when you hear entrepreneurs talk about how they're motivated and what builds them, it's so similar to creative people and filmmakers. Even though they're building technology, you'll be like, wow, it feels like they're filmmakers. And that's the other way. My sort of right brain wants to hear other people talk about the challenges and the worst days. Most of those things are all about failures. And we are so, like, we have to have such thick skins to be able to build and create when there's not enough money or resources or teams. And that's exactly what entrepreneurs go through. And when you see the greats that get through that, give you your secrets, it really motivates me. So that's sort of my right-brained approach. Yeah?
So obviously nobody knows what Apple's thinking, but what is your working hypothesis what they're thinking?
That's a great question. What is Apple thinking? That's a fair question. You could ask that a lot. What is Apple thinking? I actually believe that Apple is building a camera. And I think that part of the Vision Pro, one of our engineers, David Benjamin, said brilliantly, everybody's going to be talking about, like, the Vision Pro failed, right? But let's just think for a second. That means the Vision Pro failed by what metric? By what metric? Because they made somewhere between $5 and $6 billion on what they received for the Vision Pros, and if it costs less than that, that's interesting, right? But we don't know what Apple's goals are, and I'm willing to bet Apple achieved all of their objectives for Vision Pro, and it may not be to be as popular as the iPhone. But when people say it has to be this popular for it to be a success, that's not necessarily what Apple's goal was, right? What if, remember that the Vision Pro is the first Apple product that has 2 processors in it, right? And they're running 2 processors at the same time so they can do the real-time spatial stuff and the video. So now they successfully did 2 major things with 0 latency at the same time. There's an M3 in a Vision Pro, plus an additional processor for the video, which is similar to a phone. And that worked. And now they have that, and they have all these cameras, right? And I think ProRes Log is a prelude to them understanding that Apple Log is about ProRes, and putting ProRes into this is pointless because it's for nobody except it's a test, right? And can this actually shoot ProRes in a phone in Log? And once you start to imagine a device like this, but imagine it being 40 millimeters thick, and imagine having 2 processors, and imagine all these other things, now a few years, I could see an Apple camera, and imagine, first of all, we'd have a camera that had menus that we actually liked, right? Plus, everyone in the whole world could run it. But you go to any of these cameras that people have, you're like, I have no idea who would design this menu system, so they're all different and terrible, but everybody knows how to operate iOS, right? And then we have the value of the Apple ecosystem. They have the App Store, a camera that you can connect, and you can download whatever function, feature, LUT, tool you want. And then the whole developer community can build a tool for every possible thing, and you just download it to your camera instead of have to wait for firmware every 3 years. Like, that is a game changer, and I'm pretty sure if Apple built a camera, about 85% of the market would be like, okay, I want one. That wouldn't take very long. And I think that's where ProRes, iPhone 16, this 4K stuff, Dolby Vision, Vision Pro, I think that's where all it's leading. And I think Apple investing in silicon and making these, where people about 5-6 years ago were writing Phil Schiller saying, Apple's abandoning the pros, I don't see any evidence of that. You know, I see evidence of leaning in to creative people, which is what sort of Steve Jobs did at the beginning, was lean into creative people. And I think that's absolutely happening. And I think there's a vacuum that is being created by the disparate systems of cameras that are kind of all over the place. And they're all kind of like, okay. And I think everyone wants this to work. And all Apple has to do is get it right. And that's my guess.
We got to move on, Mike.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Michael.